right, well, good evening, everybody. Sorry for the extremely late start. Somehow I accidentally got logged out of my streaming app on my phone and also several of the websites on my computer. I'm not going to name names, but I think maybe it was because my parents were using my computer a few weeks ago. Possibly, I don't know. But I'm ready to play a concert for you. And tonight's performance is entitled Music of Old New York. So we will explore everything from the very beginnings of the popular music industry in Tin Pan Alley to ragtime and early jazz, stride piano, and of course, Broadway show tunes. And I've received a lot of fun requests for tonight's concert already. I'll try and get to as many of those as I can. But what I'm going to do by way of opening is play for you a long medley of old-time waltzes that I started playing a number of years ago. And these are from the very earliest days of Tin Pan Alley, the 1890s and first decade of the 1900s. I bet you'll recognize a lot of these anyway. Don't let the dates scare you to death. We're going to do Sidewalks of New York and a tune. This is not actually from New York. It's a British music hall song. Everyone knows it is Bicycle Built for Two, otherwise known as Daisy Bell. I'll do The Band Played On. We'll do In the Good Old Summertime, Gus Edwards' School Days, Meet Me in St. Louis, and the famous tune about the neighborhood in New York City called The Bowery. And then I always end with Take Me Out to the Ball Game. And by the way, the first song is probably the most recent of the whole bunch, written about 1915, called Memories. I believe the music was written by Egbert Van Alstyne. It's a very famous old waltz. So here is my old-time waltz medley in celebration of the early days of Tin Pan Alley. Only one chorus of each tune. We're going to go straight through it. Here it goes. Thank you so much. Well, there's my old-time waltz medley. How many of those songs did you all recognize? I forgot to mention one of the most important ones, which was After the Ball, the song that became the symbolic birth of Tin Pan Alley, the music publishing business in New York, when it came out in 1892. Now that is before ragtime really came on the scene. It's a non-syncopated waltz, but it was still popular music in the sense that we think of popular music today. And well, it's very different than today's music, of course, and I'm kind of glad of that. But After the Ball was written by Charles K. Harris, who was also an important music publisher. He wrote mostly maudlin ballads and waltzes, what Johnny Maddox used to call Mother, Home, and Heaven songs. And now, if you look on my YouTube channel, you'll see a film short featuring Charles K. Harris singing that song. Pretty unusual find there that I was able to obtain. It was done in the late 20s before Charles K. Harris died. Well, I'm going to play some more tunes for you, and I'm going to do another big long medley, this time celebrating the man who was probably the king of Broadway in the early 1900s. And I'm sure all of you are familiar with him. That's why I wore my patriotic vest for tonight's concert. We're going to do the music of George M. Cohan. And first up, of course, is the Yankee Doodle Boy, which is the correct title of the song that everyone calls Yankee Doodle Dandy. They just call it that because of the movie of the same name. And then after the Yankee Doodle Boy, I'll play Mary's a Grand Old Name. We'll do Give My Regards to Broadway. After that, Harrigan, one of Cohan's sort of Irish-flavored tunes. And then the famous Over There from World War I. And two waltzes written by Cohan, Little Nellie Kelly, I Love You, and 45 Minutes from Broadway. Those are probably the most obscure two songs that I'm going to play in this medley. And then I'll wind up with, of course, the wonderful You're a Grand Old Flag. And if you looked at my Facebook promo for tonight's concert, you may have seen the original sheet music cover for that tune. And you might have noticed the original title was You're a Grand Old Rag. It really didn't have anything to do with ragtime. I think they were referring to the American flag as an old rag. And of course, in those days, people thought that that was disrespectful. So Cohan quickly changed the title to You're a Grand Old Flag. And I have the first edition of that. That said, of course, these tunes are really more ragtime in style because that kind of music had already infiltrated onto Broadway. So here is my George M. Cohan medley. There's still a statue of him in Times Square. Music of old New York, for sure. Thank you so much. All music by George M. Cohan, who was the only songwriter that ever got a Congressional Gold Medal. I used to say Congressional Medal of Honor, and then someone corrected me. Technically, it was a Congressional Gold Medal. It was given to him by President Franklin Roosevelt, specifically for writing two songs, Over There and You're a Grand Old Flag. So that's a little bit about Mr. Cohan. He wrote two wonderful instrumental ragtime piano pieces as well. The best one is called Popularity. If I'd had time, I could have learned that and played it for you tonight, but that's for a future concert, I suppose. Now, I'll go ahead and mention that I do accept virtual tips for these concerts. You should be able to find the information for PayPal and Venmo in the postings, and had trouble figuring out how to pin the tip information in the chat on Facebook. They may have made some changes on the website. You know, they do that occasionally. So I'm not sure what's going on there, but I sure appreciate those tips. It's helpful to my career. I'll tell you a little bit more about my future travels and what I'm going to be doing in the next few weeks a little bit later on. But for now, let me keep playing some tunes here. We're going with the theme, which is music of old New York. And I think it would be appropriate to do some of the ragtime tunes that came out of New York. And right before the concert, I decided I would pull out a piece of sheet music here to show you an original from my collection. Now, you've all probably seen this many times, but what's special about this is that this is the very first edition of Alexander's Ragtime Band. This came out of the Johnny Maddox collection. And the way that he knew and showed me this was the first edition is because you can see a photograph of Emma Karras down here on the bottom of the music, the woman who introduced the song in vaudeville. And on all the later editions, there would be a photograph of someone else with a different name on it. But you see, there's no name except at the top of the music. So that is Emma Karras, and this is the very first edition of Alexander's Ragtime Band. So let me play that for you here momentarily. Oh, Akimi has just notified me that Facebook Live does not appear to be working tonight. I have no idea why. I'm so sorry. I have no idea. It stopped after 2 minutes. You know, that could be because I had trouble logging in at the very beginning of the concert. Gosh. I'm so sorry about that, folks. Give me half a second and let me see if I can fix the problem. I don't know if I can. Maybe I'll just... yeah, I know. It looks like only YouTube is working. Twitch should be working. You can go follow me on Twitch or subscribe on Twitch. There's about 3 people over here. Yeah, you know, I'm probably going to say that I'm just going to keep continuing, even though I'm really only getting very many viewers here on YouTube tonight. It's better than starting the concert over. And that way, there's a full, complete concert on my YouTube channel that people can watch in the future. So I'm just going to keep going. Sorry about that. Okay, back to Alexander's Ragtime Band. Irving Berlin would have been probably better known in his own lifetime as a composer of ragtime tunes than Scott Joplin. Now that may surprise some of you, but his tunes were so popular, and he got his start as a singing waiter in New York City around 1907. That's when his first tune came out, and he wrote so many popular ragtime songs, and this was the most famous of all of them from 1911. Let me play you my version of it now. very much. Alexander's Ragtime Band. I didn't do the full medley where I played Dixie and all those other things. I did a little bit of a shortened version, but I did include Swanee River because, of course, the words to the song go, if you want to hear the Swanee River played in ragtime, come on in here, Alexander's Ragtime Band. So now, I had planned another off-the-cuff medley of some early Tin Pan Alley tunes that are all ragtime in style that came out of New York City in the early 1900s. So let me play a few of these for you now. We're going to do Bedelia, one of the big rag hits of 1903. It's another Irish-flavored tune. Irish-flavored tunes were popular in those days. Bedelia, I Want to Steal You. And after that, we'll do Under the Bamboo Tree, written by the great African-American songwriters Bob Cole and J. Rosamond Johnson. Cole and Johnson were some of the first black songwriters on Broadway. All of their music, I think, just about would be considered ragtime. And Under the Bamboo Tree was used years later in the movie Meet Me in St. Louis, of course. And then I'm going to do a tune written by Gus Edwards. I may play several of his tunes tonight. He was a very big vaudeville star and also an important songwriter. And he had his own music publishing business. Gus Edwards wrote songs like School Days. He wrote In My Merry Oldsmobile. And this tune, which I'm going to play now, which is By the Light of the Silvery Moon. And then I'm going to wind up with another Moon tune, which was written by Jack Norworth and Nora Bayes, two of the big vaudeville stars. I'm sure performed in New York all the time, probably places like the Palace Vaudeville Theater. And it's a tune called Shine On, Harvest Moon. So here's a little medley of some more early Tin Pan Alley ragtime numbers. very much, folks. Well, I've never played those tunes together before. It makes a nice little medley of songs, all from between the years 1903 and 1908, I believe. No, 1902 and about 1908. Yep. Oh, I see a request here. I can certainly fit that in. Let's do it. I got a request for Chinatown, My Chinatown. Yeah, that was written by the same guys that wrote Bedelia, Jerome and Schwartz. I believe it's William Jerome and Jean Schwartz. They were very famous, both Tin Pan Alley and Broadway songwriters in the early 1900s. So let's do Chinatown, My Chinatown, and with it another tune just to make the performance longer, which is sort of in the same style and from the same period. We'll do Alabama Jubilee, written by George L. Cobb, who was from New York. I believe that he grew up in Buffalo, New York, but I'm sure he wrote many of his tunes while he was in New York City. Whether he did or not, I don't know. But let's do Chinatown, My Chinatown. Here you go. Sure. This is for Starscream Pierce on YouTube. I'm sorry, I'm not very good at remembering the YouTube handles. I'm pretty good with names, but the YouTube handles, not as much. Thank you very much. Chinatown, My Chinatown with Alabama Jubilee. Okay. Oh, the Boswell sisters sang that. I didn't know that. I definitely want to do a little bit more by Irving Berlin, since he was the songwriting king of New York in the 1910s and certainly into the 20s as well. So let me know what Irving Berlin tunes you might want to hear. I can do a few of those requests. Yes, I see some other requests here. I will get to those as the concert goes on. I thought about playing Everybody's Doing It Now, or also possibly When the Midnight Choo-Choo Leaves for Alabama. Let me know which one of those you'd all like to hear. I guess I don't have to check Facebook tonight since it's not working, but I could check Twitch real quick. Okay. Great, I'm up to over 120 viewers on YouTube. You know, Wall Street Rag would have been a great choice for tonight, but I didn't think about that. I would need to practice it. Jim Moritz wants to hear When the Midnight Choo-Choo Leaves for Alabama. Oh, I could do I Love a Piano, too. That's a request from Kelly Kaufman. Let me play I Love a Piano, and then we'll do the Midnight Choo-Choo. Very much. I Love a Piano. You know, as I was playing that, I realized that I think I know every word to the song. I particularly love the verse. That's one of the things that made Irving Berlin an especially great songwriter, is that with most of his famous material, he wrote not only the words, but the music as well. He wrote both. The same is true of Cole Porter, but relatively few other songwriters in the Great American Songbook. I love the verse to this. As a child, I went wild when the band played. How I ran to the man when his hand swayed. Clarinets were my pets, and the slide trombone I thought was simply divine. But today, when they play, I could hiss them. Every bar is a jar to my system. But there's just one musical instrument that I call mine, and that's exactly how I feel. Okay, let's do another big hit of the ragtime years for Irving Berlin, 1912, a couple years earlier, When the Midnight Choo-Choo Leaves for Alabama. so much. When the midnight choo-choo leaves for Alabama. You might notice I'm sweating in here again tonight. It's really hot in Durango, Colorado. And my mother and one or two other people were confused last week when I said that I had the air conditioning off. It's not broken. All I have is a window air conditioner. And the window air conditioner would make too much noise for the concert. So for the 2 hours that I do the concert, I always just have to turn that off. And unfortunately, it gets pretty warm in here. But that's a relatively short period throughout the year. And I think it's best just to shut it off so that you can hear the piano clearly. I even had a couple of complaints about my clock ticking, so not chiming, just the ticking on the clock. So I try to be careful and have everything set up for these concerts. Oh, greetings there to Australia. You know, I played a tour all over New South Wales and even one night at a jazz club in Brisbane, Australia, and I absolutely loved it. So, well, it's also after 7 o'clock here in Durango, and so I will mention that I do accept virtual tips for these concerts. You can send in a tip on PayPal or Venmo, and if you don't trust PayPal, I have a P.O. box on my website for checks. Unfortunately, it may be several weeks before I'm able to do another virtual concert. I'm going to, just because I'm going to be out of town, I'm going to be playing at the Cinecon Classic Film Festival at the Old Town Music Hall in El Segundo, California, Labor Day weekend. I'll be accompanying several silent films, a feature-length movie from 1927 called Little Mickey Grogan, and I'm doing about 3 Laurel and Hardy shorts, which will be over an hour of silent film accompaniment as well. And it'll be the first time I've played at the Old Town Music Hall in many years. I'm looking forward to it. And then I'm playing at a conference shortly after that as well. And I don't think it would hurt to mention that for both of these events, I'm not paid. I just sort of am doing these as promotion for my career in hopes that it will be beneficial. And anyhow, that's why I'm still very grateful for the virtual tips here online. It's not easy to make a living doing this. And that's all I'll say about that for now. And anyhow, let's move on to some real instrumental ragtime music and early jazz that came out of New York City. And I believe I had a request for this. I was thinking about playing it anyway. Here's the original sheet music for Lucky Roberts' Junkman Rag. And the cover features very famous dancers, Maurice and Florence Walton. Now, Lucky was one of the first African-American pianists from Harlem to have his music published. In 1913, he had the Junkman Rag and Pork and Beans, which were both published by Joseph W. Stern in New York. And Junkman Rag was quite a hit. There was both an instrumental piano version and a song version of the tune. And but I'm going to play Junkman Rag for you, and I'm not going to do it the way it's written in the sheet music because it's extremely simplified in the key of C. Now, Lucky Roberts played it in C sharp, of course, and B natural, I believe, on his record. And my arrangement takes a more traditional approach and goes to the subdominant key, which would be the F sharp. F sharp. And I know you're all music students, so this is very important. The Junkman Rag. out, man, Rag. Thank you so much, folks. Now, I don't know Snooky Ookums, folks. I don't know that. Never played that. Besides which, I have so many other composers that I want to discuss. I've already done quite a bit of Irving Berlin tonight. Would be nice to do one of his waltzes or something later. I might do that. In the meantime, I get many requests prior to the concert on Facebook or by email. This one came in by email from Bob Anderson. He suggested not only playing Lucky Roberts, but some Willie the Lion Smith as well. And I think that would be fun and interesting. Of course, he was one of the legendary stride pianists in New York. Lucky was kind of on the cusp of ragtime and stride, just like U.B. Blake. But Willie was one of the greats, along with Fats Waller and James P. Johnson, who are better known. So I thought I would do some of Willie's music because I haven't done it as often. And I've only ever played these two pieces that he wrote. I'm just going to do them both for you now, back to back. The first one is from 1925, and I believe it was his first published composition. Donald Lambert had a hot stride piano version of this as well, but I'm going off the original sheet music, which is a little bit simpler, to be honest with you. From 1925, Keep Your Temper by Willie the Lion Smith. Keep Your Temper. Thank you very much, folks. That is a great tune, isn't it? Somebody just said this is absolutely fantastic. I think it's a terrific tune. Oh yeah, someone just asked for Father Knickerbocker. I do have an original copy of that rag, but I've never played it. And I'm sure there is some music related to Coney Island as well. I had a request, this came from Penny Schwartz, I think, for My Coney Island Baby. You know, that's a great old tune, but I've never played it. It's just something else on the list of music that I need to learn. Now we're going to jump forward in time a little bit to later in Willie's career, 1934. Around the same time he wrote Echo of Spring, which is probably his biggest hit as far as piano pieces go. I don't think he wrote any pop songs that were hits either, so it's probably Echo of Spring is the most famous one. But anyway, from 1934, this is a real pretty piece. It's called Rippling Waters by Willie the Lion Smith. We're getting into some of the famous jazz of New York City now as well. New York, Willie, I can't pronounce his full name. It's something like William Henry Joseph Bonaparte Bertolf Smith. He was an African-American Jew, which I think is just so interesting. You know, part of these old musicians, the piano players, the ragtimers, the jazz musicians, was just what characters they were. You know, you could hardly hear Willie's piano playing for the cigar that he would always keep in his mouth. Or he would mumble while he played. But I think he was a brilliant composer. So here's Rippling Waters by Willie the Lion Smith. Thank you so much. Rippling Waters. I think I've only played those perhaps one other time on a virtual concert, so I thought that would be something fun and different for tonight. Let me see. I've had a lot of requests for 42nd Street. I'm going to do that towards the end of the concert. You know, I think it's time to represent another style of music which undoubtedly got its start in New York City. And just like stride piano, it was an outgrowth of traditional ragtime piano. I'm talking about novelty piano, the king of which was Zez Confrey, Edward Zez Confrey. And I could play a number of his tunes for you. I'm trying to think which one I want to play. You know, the only famous one that I do is Kitten on the Keys, so I could play that for you. I think what I'll do instead is a number that he wrote later on in the 1930s, and I use this for the title of one of my CDs. It's still a very good album. You can buy it on my website. It's called Sunshine from the Fingers. This is from about 1937. An example of novelty piano by Zez Confrey. Sunshine from the Fingers. Thank you, folks. Manhattan Serenade. Yeah, that's another one that would be wonderful to play, except that I don't know it by heart. And I have never played Dizzy Fingers either. That's one of those tunes which I don't think it hurts to say here on my virtual concert. I wouldn't say this in public, perhaps, like if I'm playing The Entertainer. But it's one of those tunes I've heard so many times that I have chosen not to put it in my repertoire because I've just heard so many other pianists play it. I do know Kitten on the Keys, and I could play that for you if you want to hear that. That's the famous Confrey tune that I do. Now let me see. What else is on my list here? Let's move on to something that technically is not music from New York, but I want to go ahead and play this for you tonight because I promised a few people I would. We're going to Hollywood now, and I'm going to play a whole bunch of music for you from the fabulous 1932 Warner Brothers picture called 42nd Street. When the entertainment industry went out to Hollywood in the 20s and 30s, they took a lot of the stories of New York with them. They took the tales of vaudeville and Broadway, and these backstage musicals, you might call them, became extremely popular, especially in the 30s. And 42nd Street was probably the best of all of them. And there were 4 tunes written for the movie by Harry Warren and Al Dubin, and I'll go ahead and play all 4 of them for you now. 42nd Street, Shuffle Off to Buffalo, and we'll do You're Getting to Be a Habit with Me, and Young and Healthy. All the music from 42nd Street. Here we go. much. 42nd Street. Those are pretty great songs, aren't they? It's hard to beat the music of Harry Warren. I think he's kind of underrated. He won a number of Academy Awards and was equally as prolific as Gershwin and Cole Porter, but you don't hear the name Harry Warren quite as often. Yeah, I know Facebook isn't working tonight. I posted a message. Hopefully a number of people could see that. It's probably why we're up to 145 here on YouTube, is because Facebook isn't working. Yes, Von Tilzer was certainly a famous New York composer. I'm not sure which of his tunes I would play for you right now if I was going to do one. I do need a few more requests, folks. I have a medley of a couple other New York songs that I'm going to close tonight's concert with, but I do need a few more requests. Let me double check Twitch just for grins. Nope, only one person over here tonight. Okay. I could do Ain't Misbehavin'. Sure. That was written for a show in Harlem by Fats Waller, and it was at a nightclub called Connie's Inn, 1929. That's another one I could do. I could do Cole Porter's So in Love. Deep Purple, I'm probably going to skip tonight. I suppose that may have been written in New York, but I've played that a lot of times. And Al Sherman, you know, a lot of his tunes were written after he got out to Hollywood. Not all of them. Of course, he lived in New York until it was probably about 1928 or so when the Sherman family moved to Los Angeles, 1927. Anyhow, well, I just can't get to all of these requests at the same time. I'm sorry about that. Let me do the Fats Waller numbers first, and then maybe I'll do the Cole Porter song. Let's do it that way. In fact, I'm going to do Fats's two most famous songs. We're going to do Ain't Misbehavin' and Honeysuckle Rose, both written for different shows at Connie's Inn in New York in the same year, 1929. you very much, folks. Honeysuckle Rose and Ain't Misbehavin', the big hits of Fats Waller, one of the greatest jazz pianists that ever lived. To me, stride piano is more a form of jazz than it is ragtime. And I like to point that out to people just to try and prove that I also am a jazz pianist. I like to stick to the melody a bit, but I do consider myself a jazz pianist as well. Oh, I see a comment here from Bob Anderson. I hope you heard the Willie the Lion Smith and the Lucky Roberts. I'm probably going to skip the James P. Johnson tonight. He's a more famous composer that I have represented in other concerts already. And I've got some ideas here to close out the concert. Anyway, I had a request for a tune by Cole Porter called So in Love, which was written for the musical Kiss Me, Kate in 1948. Now, Cole Porter had been away from the Broadway scene for a few years at that time. And then in 1948, he wrote this brilliant musical based in part on Shakespeare called Kiss Me, Kate. And I had the enormous pleasure of playing the piano for the woman who was the star of that Broadway show in 1948, Patricia Morrison. She was also in a number of movies and later was, I think, a replacement in the Broadway show The King and I. Of course, she had been very close friends with Cole Porter. I got to play for her at her apartment in Los Angeles twice, thanks to my friend Miles Kruger, the Broadway historian who lives, I think it's on Detroit Street in LA. He has an incredible home. Reminds me a little bit of Johnny Maddox's house, what it used to look like. Just the incredible amount of memorabilia and autographed pictures and music and Broadway playbills and everything. Anyway, Miles called up Patricia for me, and I went over there and I played this tune. Now, I had never heard this tune very many times, and it is a slow ballad, a love song, and I played it in a hot stride jazz piano style. And she loved it. She didn't say a word about it. And I later figured out it's supposed to be kind of a ballad. So now when I perform the tune, I do it both ways. We'll do it slow, and then we'll do it in fast stride piano. So in Love. Thank you very much. So in Love from Kiss Me Kate. You know, that's an example of the wonderful show music that came out of New York City for many years after the early jazz era, you know, well into the 50s and 60s, if not later than that. There were wonderful Broadway musicals written by people like Rodgers and Hammerstein. You know, I thought about playing the songs from Showboat tonight as well by Jerome Kern, but there just isn't time to cover it all. And so I'm going to do a little medley of tunes to close out here, all about New York City. And these are tunes that I play very often when I'm playing in public, say for tourists from New York. These are some of the tunes I do. It's a little bit of an abbreviated version of the melody, a medley, because I've already played some of the other tunes like Sidewalks of New York and 42nd Street. We're going to do Manhattan, which is from a Broadway show written by Rodgers and Hart called The Garrick Gaieties in 1925, I believe. And after Manhattan, we're going to do the Academy Award-winning song of 1935, Lullaby of Broadway. And then I'm going to end with, it's actually one of the newest pop songs in my repertoire. And it was written for a movie called New York, New York by Kander and Ebb, two of my favorite Broadway songwriters. The theme from New York, New York, which was a movie starring Liza Minnelli, although most people associate it with Frank Sinatra. And I'll say a little bit more before I sign off after this. But for now, let me finish with this medley of tunes, music of old New York. folks, New York, New York. I really love that tune. As I said, I'm very fond of the music of Kander and Ebb. John Kander's still living. I sure would love to meet him while he's still around, but I haven't been able to track him down. Thank you all so much for listening tonight. Thank you for switching over to YouTube and sticking with me. I appreciate those virtual tips very much. It helps keep me going in this career. And it unfortunately will probably be a while before I'm able to do another virtual concert. It may be as late as the end of September. I'm sorry it has been so sporadic. It's just going to have to be that way. I am traveling a lot. I don't have a lot of high-profile gigs or anything, but I am traveling, and maybe I'll see some of you out in Southern California at the Cinecon Film Festival. I hope so. And, you know, normally I only announce the concerts on Facebook, but maybe it's time to send another email when I'm able to do it regularly. That's what I'm thinking. Towards the end of September, I will send a mass email to my mailing list, which has about 500 people on it now. And that way you'll be better informed when I'm going to be able to continue doing this on a weekly basis, because I do intend to do it pretty much weekly through this winter. And thank you all again for listening, and I will see you in a couple of weeks. Good night for now.